Now you're going to wonder what makes me conclude that my next guest is a good father. Very simple. We've done a report on Today's Woman once, and we were looking for fathers who were exemplary. And he was one of the names that popped up. And I saw how involved he was in raising his 2 kids. You still have 2 kids now? Have they increased? A boy and a girl. So Oguche is joining Kemi on the set now. Oguche, it's nice to have you.
Nice to be here.
And this is one man that the photo on his DP is his wife's own. I kept on thinking it was his wife's number. And I'm like, why do you have her phone, her picture on your phone as your DP?
Well, I guess she's my princess.
Your wife is your princess?
Yeah, she's my princess.
Lovely answer.
And I always try to make that clear to her and also to my kids, because I always want my kids to see the way I treat their mom. Because once it's ingrained in their mind, especially for my son, he begins to want to treat his wife like that and other women like that.
How did you become like that?
I deliberately... I don't know. I think it comes from generations. I saw my dad do that to my mom. You know, my dad, you know, I think my mom is the best thing that happened to him. And it sort of happens naturally. What you see happen is that people repeat the things that they see.
Kemi just said that. I thought it was statistics.
Yeah, they might not know it, but they repeat things that they see. I mean, when I gave birth to my son, I wrote an article.
You gave birth to your son? Come on, Kemi.
When we had our son.
I mean, you have to give your wife some credit for giving birth to your son.
I drove
when I watched my son come.
How about that? How about we say when you watched your son be delivered?
Okay, I drove her to the hospital. I was in labor with her.
Okay, and we held her hand. When you watched your son be delivered by someone such as myself.
Okay, sorry.
So I think whatever we achieve in life, if you fail as a parent, I think you failed. For me, I think that's the greatest role that we have as human beings, to give something to the next generation. Because if we are gone, it's the values that we put in our kids that's the most important. I remember when I was young, my dad used to read in the car when we were going to school. He's always...
So dad's still alive?
He's still alive.
She's given a word, okay.
Yeah, and I realized that I found myself reading in the car also.
To your kids?
Yeah, so it just happened naturally. I didn't have to.
Hey, guy, what kind of job do you do that you have time to read to your kids in the car?
Yeah, on the way to school, I drove them at school.
So you do school run?
Yeah, I do school run.
See what I mean? I didn't even know that.
My father used to do school run too.
So it's back to what you're saying. It's back to what you're saying about what... So in the course of your work now, what have you found out from these young boys? The role model.
My work, violence begets violence. That's the first thing. So exactly what Oguche was saying. I mean, if you give a child an enabling environment and you correct the child and you start at a young age, at the formative age where it's impressionable and you can start changing the attitudes and the mindset, then you will be able to change the story. So what we're finding now is that between those ages of 12 and 18, the boys that we talk to do engage in rather irresponsible behavior. What we do is we run like baseline surveys prior to the
And do you go to public schools? Or?
We go to only the public schools. And a significant percentage of them do admit to using drugs, drinking alcohol, watching porn and pornography, and as I said, engaging in behavior that would be, if you will, you know...
Antisocial or negative?
Well, maybe on antisocial, because deviant might be a bit extreme. But yes, behavior that, you know, is untoward, and behavior that would encourage that young boy when he becomes an adult in, you know, unsavory behavior such as rape and assault.
So, but I wonder though, what do you think? What do you find happening? When I say you are a rare species, would you agree? People like you, fathers who are involved, like even in your father's time, I'm sure there were few and far between.
Well, I didn't know what I had in terms of the way my dad until I went to secondary school, and I realized that not everyone was like my dad.
Wow.
In terms,
not every dad was like him.
Not every dad was like my dad. He was very involved. He sort of gave everything for us, you know, and that was and still is my role model. And I think every dad should strive to be that to their own children.
Is that happening though?
Well, another thing is people have not been taught. People have not been taught. So
Kemi's right.
Society, whether it's the church, whether it's the family, so people only do what they know. People do what has been passed down culturally. So like you said, Nigeria is a patriarchal society. So people see, my dad did this, so I'll do this. We need to stop somewhere and saying, I want to change the narrative, and how do we begin to change the narrative? That's where...
How do you think we can begin to change the narrative?
Well, I guess shows like this, churches play a very important role. Family units play a very important role. And, you know, guys, you know, Friday nights is the day guys think of hanging out. I'm thinking, why don't we make it family? let's come back home.
Get out of here. This guy is saying the right things.
No, seriously, because, that family unit is so important. Even from a female point of view, in terms of the father should be the one that will give the woman value, his daughter value. So I call my daughter Genius Princess because I want her to realize, number one, she's a genius. Number two, she's a princess. So she begins to grow up with that. And I call my son Global Leader for him to realize.
Why are you not calling your daughter Global Leader, your son Genius Prince?
Yeah,
How about that? Well, like you said, and like you were saying, ideally, in a family unit that is not dysfunctional, and you have that dying species, to use your term, such as Ogochi here, yes, you do have that opportunity to change the narrative of that young man, such as your son.
Do you think we can do it, though?
What we find is, sadly, there are more dysfunctional family units out there where we don't have the opportunity and the luxury of having father figures engage their sons and daughters the way that you're doing. And so what we find is 90% of the perpetrator, the abuser, is that father, is that uncle, is that caregiver. And this is what we're finding out.
So what are the challenges that poses for you as you work, for example? So what's the strategy that we can take to solve this problem?
So our strategy is educate the child first, because there's so many children that are not even aware that what is being done to them is a crime and is an act that's unbecoming. Because we have children that have been abused from age 2, age 3.
I think it's normal.
And so they have become normalized in their thinking when it comes to abuse. And so it's important for us to start very simply by informing them that it is wrong, and changing the story by
helping them to
tell their story, giving them that voice. Because when you're in a family unit where father is the perpetrator and father is that financial provider,
and mommy is not
and
talking,
mom is an enabler because she doesn't have the financial will or the self-esteem to speak on your behalf, then that silence and that unhealthy environment, that dysfunctional family unit, continues until that young man becomes an adult and sadly then replicates that family unit in his own home.
So Oguchi, I must tell you this though, we do know that men are put under pressure to the extent that they're supposed to be providers. Is it possible that in the process of being providers, men lose their humanity because they are put in that position? They don't have the patience or the time because the focus is get the money, get the money.
Yeah, there's a sense of that. But like myself and Howard chatting just before the show, you can't place the blame on society. So everybody needs to individualize it and say, what kind of life do I want? What kind of children do I want? What kind of family do I want? I have family goals. I have a family creed. So you need to tell yourself, it doesn't matter what's happening, but within my house, this is what will happen.